Hey, it's Brian and Chris here from Resolve Technology, and today we got the QuickBooks Master, Chris, on the call. He loves QuickBooks Desktop, right, Chris?
Oh yeah, I'm jumping for joy over here.
So we helped out a client's mom the other day who's like some sort of bookkeeper or whatever. So they were in a bit of a bind. So we normally don't work on personal computers and things like that, but we had to help this client out. So anyway, in the process, we have years worth of QuickBooks experience, QuickBooks Desktop specifically. And so we know all the ins and outs, the error messages, all that. We can run it over the network. So we still got a couple clients on it, but we're recommending nowadays that QuickBooks Intuit, the company that runs books, is really pushing you to the cloud or their enterprise version. We're not seeing major problems with the enterprise version, though it is a lot more money than the Pro Edition and the other versions that QuickBooks made through the years. So, anyway, Chris, maybe you could talk about the problems you ran into with the old version of the desktop and maybe what a solution is going forward.
So I kind of went into this blind. Just they were using QuickBooks. It was 3 company files, older version of QuickBooks. Not sure how old. I think the path of least resistance would have been like, oh, if you can go to the Intuit site and download older version of Quick. I believe 2010 or 2012 is the last one you can get though. Generally, what you'd like to do is buy a newer, the traditional sense, buy the latest desktop version that you can. So like prior to all this cloud, move into subscription model online. They'd buy the latest version. We'd install it, activate it. You'd launch the company, you'd open the company file in the new version, and it would do some kind of conversion. The proprietary database books uses to be compatible with the newer version. I got a bunch of errors. In this situation, I found the errors. I'd look them up and see. We've seen it before. We have some internal documentation on it. But we ended up getting them running. Essentially, they wanted to help manage the company file for this client's mother. So they kind of just ran with what I had done with them, installed it, and took care of everything. But they were on QuickBooks 2008. So occasionally you might need to go into you might need to use the QuickBooks File Doctor and some of these other books built-in tools to diagnose and find issues. It's kind of a Hail Mary pass, in my opinion. It doesn't always work to fix the file, which is why it's really crucial. So when I started doing this, it alters the QuickBooks file. So my first thought and what I need to address immediately is backing it up. Not the built-in QuickBooks backup, but just copying all the books files for that company file and making sure I have a backup copy. So I essentially just backed up their entire computer, their old personal computer, restored it to a new one, but I didn't install, we can't install QuickBooks 2008. We did stumble across 2021 or 2020, and they had an activation for it, so I just installed that for them. But yeah, it's your typical QuickBooks error message where it could be one of several things. You can reach out to QuickBooks support, but that's really, I don't think
I
that's the route
see.
you want. Yeah, you're better off having IT look at it.
Right.
An
Before you
account.
get too far ahead, Chris, just so people know, when you're going from 2020 or whatever you were, a later version like that, you got to remember, number one, like Chris said, you want to have a backup. Number two is it takes everything from 2008 and converts it to 2020. So you can't go back to your 2008. You can't run it through your 2008
Right.
version because it does all this error checking and things like that and conversion over to a newer version. So it works in the 2020 version. So there's no going back. So make sure you have a copy. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, no. So the QuickBooks Desktop isn't entirely gone, though, even though we got up on the screen here the new online editions and what functionality, the cost. In big, bright text, they show the deal you get for 3 months only, and then the real price is kind of the smaller text hidden in the background. But if you 100% need desktop, books on the desktop, you're a bigger company, you need Books Enterprise still exists. We have we've worked with plenty of accounting firms that did stuff like this, and they worked with all different organizations, schools, industries, and they have all kinds of versions of QuickBooks Enterprise. So we'd have to actually maintain several versions of QuickBooks Enterprise. And another thing, this is a little unrelated to the online version, but single user and multi-user mode. So Brian mentioned earlier, alluded to, you can run it over the network. Generally, ideally, you'd have a server that it lives on, an actual Windows server, and it communicates with all the clients. So you'd have to customize the install to make it a server one. And there's a QuickBooks database service, Windows service running on the server. And so if the server goes down, the clients can't communicate. Another issue is sometimes the clients access the company file from the client computer, their workstation or laptop, in single user mode, then no one else can get in. So that's
Right.
another key point. You want to make sure you're using multi-user if you're in that kind of environment. If you don't have a server, that's not the end of the world. You can run smaller businesses that may not need all that extra infrastructure and overhead cost of equipment. You can run it as a server and use it on a workstation, and then other workstations on that network can connect into it and utilize
Right.
it together. That's the
Right,
other
but
way
at
we
the end,
see.
but the end of the day, Chris, like what we're seeing right now is if you don't want to spend the extra money for QuickBooks Enterprise, if you want the desktop version and you can't afford Books Enterprise, you pretty much got to go to the cloud. Like Intuit is forcing you that way. So
Yeah.
to ditch these older versions because like in Chris's instance, that was nothing but a headache to get to that point. Eventually it did work, but you risk like losing data and things like that. It's to me, it's just not worth it. Like move to the QuickBooks Online if you can't afford Books Enterprise, and you just have to suck it up. There's nothing like we can do or anybody else can do because Intuit is just moving that direction. We're seeing it across the board. We see it. Accounting people are seeing the same thing. So it's not just like I saying this, it's across the industry.
Yeah. I just wanted to mention though, from at least I haven't done the experience yet, but we had a client move to the online version. They did have it on a server previously this year. They said it's different, but they were okay with it. They've been working around some of the changes. But I guess Intuit did make it easy. We didn't actually get involved on that process of migrating it to the online version. They sent the steps of what the end user needed to do. She sent over the stuff. She would have reached out to me if she did have an issue. I talked to her, but we've had a few conversations before they actually moved over. But it really wasn't that big of a deal. It was pretty painless. Now one thing she did is I had her taking backups of the company files and your books data is important, but there's multiple ways you can go about that. You can we had a backup for this client because we back up the machine the server it lives on, so we were pretty much all set. But just as a safety net, I had her use the built-in QuickBooks tool to back up the company file, which is always good to do because doesn't it do some kind of check? You always used to say when you run that.
Yeah,
I'm
it
not
does
as
some
familiar
sort
with
of magical consolidates transactions and things like that,
Yeah.
reduces the size of the company file and just cleans everything up. And honestly, we don't know the magic behind it. That's a proprietary thing, but it does make a
Black
difference. And
magic.
like you said, that's an excellent point, Chris. One, it was painless for them, and two, the key part that we played in that was, making sure we had multiple ways, multiple backups, multiple versions, and that's the way to do it.
Yeah, no, 100% because I didn't know what Intuit was doing. I think I got forwarded on an email, but I'm like, she was concerned they'd mess everything up and then they'd lose all their stuff or data. So we had multiple backups taken over like a period of a week, and they're apprehensive to change over there. So if they did it was a breeze for them, I think. And the other part of it is if you're like, you have hourly IT, right? Or you bring someone external in like us, you'd probably save money on the online version because you're not sitting there troubleshooting. It can be a time suck depending on how it's configured and set up.
Right, because it's all lives in the cloud, it lives in a browser, there's less stuff to maintain. Okay,
There's
we'll
cache
wrap there,
issues.
Chris.
All right, have a good one.
All right, thanks.